Good morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf and welcome to another bookish breakfast. So it's really cold and gloomy and wet here this morning, and the thing that it reminds me of is a very old storybook that my grandmother used to have. And it was basically a story about the months of the year, and the plot is that a month runs away. I can't remember which month, but let's say for instance it's March runs away and February stays for an extra week of her, so that's fine, it's okay, it's not too much of a difference. February stays for an extra week, but again, eventually it gets to the point where February's like, look, I've been here 35 days and I'm supposed to be here for 28, so I'm gonna have to go now. But like, April's not ready yet. Everyone knows April's a bit capricious. April refuses to step in for March, so they have to call on May, and May comes and takes over from February, so that instead of going February to March, we go February to May. And then after May has been, June just follows automatically, because June always follows May, and then you get to the point where it should have been June, and then March gets back, I guess, and it goes from June to March, and that is exactly what it feels like is happening this year. Like, we had this gorgeous, wonderful May sunshine, and like in the book, everyone on Earth is like, what the hell's going on with the weather? Like, why have we got May weather in March? And that was what it was like. It was this endless sunshine, and now it's like March, and it's cold, and it's wet, and it's like everything that I've planted out in the garden has stopped growing, and it's just a little bit miserable, but you know. It was getting a little bit too dry, so we do need the rain. So I'm going to do another bookish breakfast and a little description of what I've been reading this week. So the first one that I wanted to mention I don't have as a physical book, because I'm reading it on serial reader. I'm reading The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. Saying that from memory, but I think I got all of the initials right. So I talked about potentially reading this in February, but in the end I didn't, because it's 27 issues long on serial reader, and I tend to find that anything over 10 issues, I find a little bit of a struggle to keep up with serial reader. Like, I can't really use it to read longer things. But I decided that in light of recent events, if it was something that I was planning to read, I might as well give it a try. And yeah, it's difficult in places because it's very rooted in the history of the time. So he starts by reflecting on the history going back towards the Civil War, and then talks about some public figures who are very, obviously very prominent at the time in which he's writing, but, excuse me, they're completely unfamiliar to me, so I've had to kind of like use a little bit of Google and a little bit of like trying to figure things out and remember things to follow that. At the moment he's talking about his work as a school teacher in a very small town, or like a village really in the south, and it is it's a really beautiful memory that he's describing. But then I've just moved on to the next section, and I guess it's a reflection on dreams that couldn't be fulfilled, and going back to that town and seeing a lot of people who had ambition and potential just being deprived of the option of pursuing those ambitions due to the structure of society at the time, and the legacy of that, as we know, is still unfortunately ongoing. So that's been quite interesting. It's not a very easily readable thing, as I kind of mentioned, but it feels like it's worth it for having a little bit of background to some more American history, which is something that I know very little about. The other thing that I have been continuing to read is Homer's The Odyssey. So I started reading this maybe just over a month ago. I'm reading half an hour a day on my days off, and it's fascinating and it's brilliant. I have just read the chapter of the Book of the Dead, and I mean, I was stunned. I thought it was amazing. I really, really, really enjoyed it. And it reminds me of every fantasy book in which the protagonist has to confront death. Like, in particular, I was thinking of his Dark Materials. The scenes in the world of the dead in his Dark Materials seem very, very reminiscent of the Odyssey, which I had no idea when I was reading his Dark Materials initially. But it's just such a fundamental question that we have, and such a fundamental like concern that we ask our fantastical heroes and heroines to explore for us because we're not able to. So I found that just a really beautiful exploration of the theme, I suppose. I'm just enjoying it overall. I think it's the kind of story that just really appeals to me in terms of the kind of, it's an adventure, but each part of the journey is self-contained. It's not a mass of confusing, complex narratives. It's like they go to one place, something bizarre and interesting happens, and then they go to the next place, and it's very much, you can see the influence on something like Voyage of the Dawn Treader or something by C.S. Lewis. That's just very much an adaptation of this tale, I think. So that's the Odyssey. Then the next one that I've been reading, so I do an hour of reading on my days off. Other than any recreational reading, I'm pushing myself to do half an hour of the Odyssey and half an hour of a non-fiction book. And last Thursday I started Rigoberta Menchu. So Rigoberta Menchu is, it says, an Indian woman in Guatemala. She is a Quiche from the Quiche Maya group. So that's one of the largest group of indigenous peoples in Guatemala. And this has been absolutely fascinating in terms of from an anthropological perspective. Too early in the morning to say that word smoothly. She talks about things like ceremonies surrounding birth and marriage, but also just in terms of a period where we're talking about sort of systemic racism and things like that. She talks about a system where racism is not just a byproduct of the system, I suppose, or like an inadvertent event. She's talking about her childhood at the moment. So this is like in the 1970s in Guatemala, which I think is around the period of the Civil War. I'm expecting the war to feature at some point. But the system is actually entirely built around enabling and supporting and continuing racism against indigenous populations. So it's quite dark, but it's good, and it really helps me to understand maybe like the society and things that I kind of saw a bit of when I was there, but I didn't really know the background to it, and I just kind of saw it from an outsider's eyes of just like a bright, colourful, beautiful country, and not really knowing the underside of the history and the story. There was one bit that I was going to just read. I'm thinking about timings. I won't read it today. I'll read it another day. Then the next thing that I've been reading some of is fiction. It's Nawal El-Saadawi, Death of an Ex-Minister. This is a collection of short stories. So I've read just the first two so far. The font in this is absolutely massive, so the short stories are quite short. The first story is the death of His Excellency, the ex-minister, so it's the kind of titular tale, and it's told as a narrative of a man talking to his mother, and he's a very insecure man, but also a very powerful man, and his sense of power is incredibly fragile. So what happens is a woman refuses to submit to him, not in a relationship, but in the workplace. She just raises her eyes to him and she looks at him in defiance. And this act of her claiming her own dignity is enough to absolutely shatter his confidence. And the way that he enacts that is to react to her with fury, and he calls her into his office and he rants at her, and he rages and rages about it, and she just stands there and rises above it all. And for all the time that she is there with her confidence and her self-possession, he just deteriorates further and further and further until he can't keep it together in his meetings. He can't act as a minister anymore because he's so undermined by this woman who, to him, like the way that he talks, you can tell a woman is worse than nothing to him. The way that she carries herself just completely tears him apart. And he talks about how he has been so used to have everybody submit to him, but in particular having women submit to him. And he says to his mother, like, if I'd ever seen you raise your eyes to my father even once, I might have been better able to cope with this. Like, he's like trying to blame his mother for his own problems. But yeah, it's the way that he says that, like, the whole of his society has been arranged, that he is so shocked that she is able to stand up to him and that she dares to stand up to him. yeah, it's a great story for making you think about things like that, and just the image of somebody just having their dignity and their self-possession and their certainty that they have the right to stand up to him, even in the smallest, even on the smallest level, and that, like, leaving a politician like scrambling and flailing and digging himself holes, it just seemed a little bit relevant at the moment. Then the next short story is called The Veil, and that's, it's basically like 2 pages long, and it's a woman talking about growing up, I suppose, and she talks about how as you grow up and you learn unpleasant things about the world, veils fall from your eyes, in terms of, like, you believed something and then you have that belief shattered and the veil is gone, and you have to see the world through, you have to see the world as it is, you have to see the truth. But then she talks about the story is set around an interaction with a man where she's kind of falling in love with him, I suppose, and she talks about how the veil falls from her eyes, but she just reaches down and she picks it back up and she puts it back on again because she doesn't want to see the truth of that situation. So that again seemed like a very, it seemed truthful to what we do, I suppose. Then the other one I have already mentioned, that I'm reading, The Stone Sky by NK Jemisin. I think this is much better than the Obelisk Gate. I really didn't particularly enjoy the Obelisk Gate, but The Stone Sky is already, like, getting me involved in the story. I'm only about that far through. I'm enjoying it. The tabs are from when Bo read it, by the way. The thing that I would say is it kind of demands to be read all in one go, and that's not something that I really can do just at the moment, because they're so, like, even sitting down one day later to pick it back up again, there's names that I've already forgotten, because there's names that are only mentioned once that somehow you're supposed to remember everything about, the description of that person and everything that went on at the same time, like, perfectly to pick up on little details. Like, I feel like it expects you to have a perfect memory, and I really don't. And there's things that happened in the Obelisk Gate that I didn't really bother to remember because I didn't enjoy it enough, that now I'm thinking, was that important? Did we learn about that before, or is this something that I'm learning about for the first time? One thing that I just have to complain about is the map. It's just a grey splodge, and the points that are marked on it aren't the points that are involved in this story. I was talking to my brother about this, and he had the theory that basically they couldn't be bothered to call the artist back in to update the map for the next books. But this is an award-winning novelist. Like, you can get a better map than that. You can get a map that you can actually read. Like, if you're gonna have a fantasy book where people are walking from place to place and it's really important where the different characters are because they're trying to, like, meet up with one another, I mean, a map is just basic stuff. So that upset me a little bit more than it perhaps should have done. The style I enjoyed in the 5th season, and then I hated in the Obelisk Gate, but I think I'm enjoying it again in this book. It feels like it's relevant again. It feels like when she's using particularly awkward phases of the style, I can see why she's doing that. And it's because she wants to have a specific effect, whereas in the Obelisk Gate I sometimes felt like it was just arbitrary, that she just felt like breaking the text up a little bit. So I'm enjoying it, and hopefully I will get some more of that read this week. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you're all having a lovely week, a lovely time, and taking care and staying safe and all of that. And speak to you soon. Bye.